We'll go ahead and get started. So thank you to everyone for joining today. Again, as we get going in this conversation, feel free to ask questions at any point in the chat, including right now. We'd love to hear, what types of problems folks are thinking about or are interested in learning about today. And Chris and I will be answering questions live as they come in. So definitely stick them in the chat. My name is Abi. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DX. Chris is head of developer experience at Thoughtworks, and we previously did a session a couple of weeks ago where we talked about the internal developer portal space, what internal developer portals are, how we're seeing companies approach this, some of the challenges they're running into. If you didn't catch that session, definitely go download the recording. It's available on our website. And in today's conversation, it's sort of a part two to our prior conversation where we want to talk about the solution space. Both Chris and I are constantly getting asked by people about the market, the different options and paths that are available, how to decide which path to take. And so today we wanted to talk about that, try to break down the market a little bit, look at what options are out there, talk about the considerations and choices that we see folks making, and try to provide some practical advice for those of you who are in this place in your own organizations. So with that introduction, Chris, let's dive in.
Yeah.
Let's start by talking about just big picture, the overall market. I mean, how many different options are out there? Let's name some of the players. Are there any new entrants or developments in the market that are worth noting? What's the big picture state of things?
Uh, every day it seems there's almost a new player in this space in one way or another, which makes it a little hard to follow. But there's, I mean, Backstage is kind of the one of the original creators of it. There's kind of the kind of Backstage variants. Roadie was kind of the first one out there. Now you have Red Hat putting some stuff out. You have Harness putting some stuff out. There's folks like Cortex and Atlassian's new tool Compass. It just seems to, the list seems to keep going and going, which is exciting and also a bit daunting for people that are looking to try to go into this space and figure out what's the right tool, what's the right path, and how do you start to make a decision that is going to impact your overall developer experience kind of now and into the future.
Similarly, I also see more and more options coming available. Incumbent, larger companies entering into this space. We want to talk about that a little bit. Lots of SaaS startups that we'll cover today. I want to double click into, I think, two particularly interesting market developments. And one is Spotify, of course, created Backstage, the open source project. And as of last year, they've been really focused on commercialization of Backstage through a paid plugin bundle. Just for folks who aren't fully caught up or in the know about what Spotify is doing, share with folks what they're up to.
So, Spotify has kind of been the king of, domains and domain driven design and the complexities that kind of come with that. And inside of their own journey, they needed a platform to be able to kind of manage the chaos of their ecosystem and the ever changing and flowing ecosystem. And what does it actually look like? And Backstage came from a hackathon project from, I think it was in 2013 or 2014. I can't remember which year, but they were really truly trying to solve internal problems, and it was that way for 6 or 7 years. And then in 2020 they said, this is a really great tool that we should try to give to the market because lots of people are having this same kind of problem, and they wanted to contribute the work that they've done to the rest of the community in one way or another.
And their paid plugin bundle, I believe there's 4 or 5 plugins. Probably the most notable one being their scorecarding plugin. This is a paid bundle. I don't know the exact pricing details. I've heard mixed reviews. Definitely a lot of excitement for what Spotify is doing, and definitely solving a need for Backstage adopters. Another development I want to just quickly highlight is Atlassian. I think this one was a little bit unexpected for me personally to see Atlassian entering into the market with Atlassian Compass. Interestingly, Compass, like Backstage, was born from their own internal tool that Atlassian also built to solve this exact problem. Uh, Compass went GA a few months ago. We know the team there, have been talking and working on different sorts of integration. So really excited about what Atlassian's doing. I think especially if you're in the Atlassian ecosystem already, it's a solution worth checking out. And we'll share more updates on our work with them as we go forth. Uh, Chris, I want to now kind of go into how to think about the overall market, and I'll share a screen because we've spent quite a bit of time, and I know you spent a lot more time than me trying to actually map the market out. So this is a visual we created. We kind of see the developer portal market, or the different paths you can take in these three buckets. This isn't a perfect model for how to think about things, but let's talk about these different approaches a little bit and help people make sense out of them. So maybe Chris, to start, you could start by talking about the build path. I mean, what does that look like? What are the different ways to go about that?
Yeah, this is definitely the most complex way of looking at things. It's also the most expensive in a lot of ways. You need a lot of expertise. You need not only people that have expertise in the framework. So say you choose something like Backstage, you need to have that knowledge of how Backstages works, what are all the intricacies of it, the plugin model, all of those other pieces. But you also need help from a design perspective, user experience, and people that really can continue to drive and push the developer experience journey forward. And that's not something that everybody has. It's something that you can build and learn over time. But if I see most people that are in larger organizations choosing this model because they have a bigger set of folks to work with. They have a bigger development community. They have design and UX and all these other pieces, where in smaller organizations, you don't see that quite so much. And the overall lift might be more than some of the value they might get out of it.
And I would share the observation that most larger organizations do seem to be going the build route, whether that's completely hand rolled, right? That's how Spotify Backstage and Atlassian Compass began. And of course, nowadays, a lot more companies building on top of Spotify Backstage, which is a framework for building developer portals. Turning to the right hand column, the pure SaaS. I know this is a space you've been following closely. I'm not quite as privy to what's happening here as you are. So give folks a quick kind of lay of the land of what's going on in that category.
Sure. So there's really, I would break this up into almost two kind of separate categories. There's the kind of opinionated point of view, and there's the more unopinionated point of view. And in the opinionated kind of point of view, that's where I would throw folks like Ops Level and Cortex, a little bit faster of a model to get up and running. They've made a lot of the decisions for you when it comes to design, experience, user flows, all those types of things. So it's not something you're going to have to necessarily concern yourself with. If that's the model that you're looking for, there's a lot of great tools that can do that. But in the end, there might be some discrepancies of how you think about something versus how the tools kind of put together. On the kind of rather unopinionated side, there is I would throw port in there for sure. The more kind of low code, no code thinking, where it's very highly customizable, but you're not writing code per se. And so you have the ability to, up to a certain point, be able to flex and push things around in a way that is, kind of needed for whatever problem you're trying to solve. I would throw kind of Compass in almost a little bit of a third point of view, because it's probably the most opinionated, because you're really embedded deeply into the Atlassian suite. So if you're using Jira, if you're using Confluence, if you're using the other kind of tools in that suite, it works with that incredibly well. Has the Forge framework for plugins. it does a really great job when it comes to working inside of that ecosystem. If you're not fully embedded in that ecosystem, or only part of your organization's embedded in that ecosystem, then it really tends to the cons of that tend to grow a little bit more.
Yeah, I love that breakdown, and I, similar to what you were talking about, the sort of hybrid, the middle category, right? You have pure SaaS, and then the pure build or build with Backstage, and then you have this gray area in the middle, whether it's something like Port that does allow you to write sort of custom bespoke integrations against it, or a Roadie, which is a pure SaaS option, but gives you an off ramp to a fully custom approach if you so choose. The Spotify plugins, which kind of bridge the build with the buy. So really interesting options and paths available on the market. I'm gonna flip to
one other thing to add in right there, like that's something that you definitely want to throw into as you think about what your journey might look like. Whether it's unopinionated or opinionated, having the ability to use something like Roadie, or the other kind of open, like Red Hat has a new kind of Backstage variant tool. Being able to, if you're looking to grow and you need that level of high levels of customization, that's an interesting place to start, because you end up with a framework that you can then customize if you ever run into that problem kind of afterwards. So there's a bunch of really interesting spaces and kind of niches inside of the landscape there that are going to be fine details that you're going to want to try to decide as you're looking across what tools you're going to want to consider.
You've already painted a great picture of the different approaches and kind of who we see benefiting from the different approaches. I want to try to break this down a little bit further, make it a little more tactical for folks who might be trying to make a decision or figure out a path right now. So now I'm sharing our breakdown of the trade-offs, the pros and cons of these different approaches. The thing I've seen with the build approach, the thing I consistently hear is that it's the only way to truly build a developer portal that is inclusive of bespoke internal developer tooling. And this is something I've talked to multiple companies where they talk about their internal developer portal journey, and they say that, look, the most valuable things that we've put in our portal are our own internal custom development tools. And we wouldn't have been able to do that if we had gone with an off-the-shelf solution. Of course, the downside is, Chris, as we know, building an internal developer portal with or without Backstage is a journey. It requires a team, it requires investment, internal marketing to sustain that investment. And so with that flexibility comes a longer journey to realize value, more upfront costs to get to that point. And I think we both see a lot of organizations struggling with that challenge.
Absolutely. I kind of alluded to this before, but you need to have levels of expertise on, you're essentially building your own dev portal. Whether you're DIY or using a tool like Backstage, you have to have the design expertise, the developer experience expertise, the user experience expertise, all of these different things that you have to really build out a portal that is going to not only be useful for your organization, but get people to actually change the way that they operate and the way that they're trying, or the way that they're trying to get things done inside the organization. That can be a high bar, especially at the beginning when you're kind of starting from scratch in a lot of ways. And that comes with cost and all of the other things associated with it, like you said.
What are your thoughts on the hybrid approach? I would call out Port specifically and Roadie. It kind of strikes a balance between the build versus the turnkey SaaS approach. What have you seen and heard?
Yeah, I would throw kind of Cortex probably in this as well, where there's really two different kinds of, there's plugin models and then there's integration models, and you're going to find integrations across the pure SaaS as well. But the hybrids allow you to kind of create your own plugins that is the kind of the mechanism you're going to use to be able to bring in those custom solutions that you have built internally and be that kind of portal into it. And the way that I see people be the most successful through that plugin model, whether it's with Backstage or with one of these hybrid solutions, is to build plugins that, you know, give aggregate information that can pull in the data that's necessary for a given context, but then be able to link out uh, to the full application that's doing all of the work that's there. You know, one of the things that I see people, you know, really struggle with is they try to shove everything into their portal. You definitely don't want to do that. But thinking about, you know, am I building a plugin? Is this something that I can build an integration with, like whether it's a Jira, Git, or any, you know, there's a whole slew of kind of plugins that are out there. But what are you actually trying to solve? What is the process that you're trying to get a developer to change to? And so that's where the hybrid kind of shines in my opinion.
I'd agree. You know, I think hybrid's the sort of interesting path. I don't know a lot about, for example, what Port's doing, but I've heard through their customers, through folks who've evaluated that product, that there is a pretty unique approach as far as sort of a shim, like an exposed API that allows for open source custom bespoke connectors to be created that integrate with it. Let's talk about the pure SaaS approach. You know, of course, I think the biggest benefit of these solutions is the fast setup, time to value, the opinionated approach, the UI out of the box. But what are some of the challenges you see with the pure SaaS solutions?
You know, I know I've mentioned this on round one, and I'll probably mention it a couple of times here, but you really have to understand what's the problem you're trying to solve. And if you don't understand that very clearly, you might end up picking a tool that's not really going to solve the issues that your organization's running across. And you know, there's a lot of different SaaS products out there, and some of them, you know, do kind of documentation, you know, well. Some of them don't do it at all. Some of them leave it to other things. So having a clear understanding of the problem you're trying to solve will help guide you into what's the SaaS solution, because in the end, you're kind of stuck with their opinionated view on how they want you to do things, and you might be in a big box, but you're still in a box. And once you hit the edge of that box, there's not an awful lot that you can do to be able to kind of overcome things. And you know, one of the last things you ever want to do when you're thinking about process improvement is build it around a tool, not around what the right thing is. And you can fall into that kind of problem space if you're not careful.
Yeah, I would echo that. I've talked to organizations that have looked at SaaS solutions and then gone that path, or have gone the build path. And the two things I consistently hear are, you know, that ability to truly customize the portal and bring things into the portal that can only be done through a build approach. You're simply not going to be able to build in some of your bespoke developer tooling into a third-party SaaS platform. Whether or not you need to or want to do that is to your point, something you need to determine up front in terms of what is the problem you're trying to solve. And then I also
And
think this one more thing, the SaaS solutions aren't necessarily cheap. And so I've also talked to organizations where, while you know, the upfront cost of building a developer portal is definitely higher than going the SaaS route, that the long-term cost is, as the developer portal maybe goes a little bit more into maintenance mode or becomes more of an inner source model, over time, SaaS fees can also add up. So I don't think from a pure dollar standpoint, there's always ROI. Although I think we would both agree that we'd see a lot of cases where there would be compelling ROI given the difficulty of going the build route.
and it's a curve, right? You're going to have higher costs for build your own upfront, and those costs are going to decrease over time, where you're going to have a faster uptick with your SaaS product, but those costs are not going to go down over time. And so you need to determine which one of those is the most appropriate for the problem you're actually trying to solve. A great example is, or another thing that you need to consider is, what is your organization good at? And do you have the ability to go and build on your own? do you have the ability, like a great example of, we've dealt with a lot of life sciences companies. They don't do a lot of custom software development, but they have a lot of APIs, and they need to be able to push out APIs to their kind of subsidiary groups or to other parts of the organization. So they don't need a lot of the bells and whistles that might come along with some of the SaaS products. And they also don't really have the ability to kind of build their own. So trying to figure out where do you fit, and again, the problem you're trying to solve is really, really key.
Agreed. And it's also worth mentioning that the market is very much in flux. In particular, it's really interesting to follow what Spotify is doing. I know Spotify is trying to really decrease that time to value for getting started with Backstage. Really excited to see what kind of impact that work will have. Before we move into the next section, there's a really great question in the Q&A from Brett Curtis. The question is, service catalogs, which Chris, you and I love to talk about. The question is, do you see larger organizations using Backstage as their source of truth for the service catalog, or other vendor tools like ServiceNow, Datadog, etc.? Chris, what do you see there?
So again, depends on exactly the problem you're trying to solve. So if you think about a ServiceNow perspective, they're in the incident management space. And if you have an incident, you need to map that incident to a certain service or sets of services. And so in that model, you kind of need something to point against. But very rarely would I ever say ServiceNow should be your catalog for services, because that's not where things are going to be done. Like, that to me feels like a really good integration point with a different portal that's going to bring you more kind of, all of the benefits that come with that portal, whether it's plugins and integrations, all those other things, and then being able to have some kind of communication with a tool like ServiceNow.
Yeah.
But
I also see, I think it's a great question. I have talked to organizations where they've started thinking about something like Spotify Backstage and then realized, hey, Datadog already gives us what we need. Or actually, SRE team, we already use ServiceNow. That's where our service catalog is going to be. I see a lot of organizations having this debate internally where different teams within the organization are sort of fighting a little bit as to what should be the source of truth. And in some cases, I see bifurcation and duplication of the service catalog, where there's multiple service catalogs and for different purposes. I don't think that's the ideal world to be in, but that's certainly the reality, especially at larger organizations where consolidating onto a single developer portal. I mean, Chris, we see organizations with multiple Backstage instances all the time. So the ideal of a single source of truth, I think, is often an ideal for larger organizations.
So here's a model that I've seen in that particular space, and this can work well if done correctly. But if you're in a large organization, you're probably never going to get rid of all of these other portals or catalogs, especially when you start getting into the data space, where you've got stuff in Azure, you've got stuff in Databricks, you've got stuff in Snowflake, or all these different places. And I've seen many people use this kind of catalog of catalogs, like not trying to build one ring to rule them all. But what we are trying to say is, here is a place where you can go and build connectors into everything else. So maybe you have a governance tool that needs levels of, okay, I need services to understand what do I want to govern against. I need a catalog and incident management to be able to understand what incidents are being managed against. But I need the source of truth for what my service catalog actually is. And then I can also build plugins and everything else against it. But that model of kind of the federated model, but having a schema to be able to pull that information back together into that single source of truth, is a model that you might want to consider, especially for the very large and kind of older organizations that have things that have been around forever, and they're probably not going anywhere anytime soon.
Chris, we've talked about the different approaches to setting up a developer portal, the pros and cons. I want to move into just some additional considerations or features that you think organizations should be thinking about. And there was one great question in the chat from Andrew Cornwall about how much do you need to define or standardize the development process before adopting an IDP? I mean, can you only do an IDP if you actually have a golden path or paths set up, or where in the journey there, or how much standardization would you say you need to really benefit?
Sure. So it all depends on what kind of a culture you want to have, but ruling with an iron fist generally doesn't work very well as far as I see it. Standardization is great. You need to reduce fragmentation across your ecosystem, and lots of developer portals can absolutely help with that by kind of providing the right golden paths, the right self-service with the right kind of infrastructure and everything else that you might need underneath that is the way that you're going to get people to align to certain things. I joke about optimizing for laziness, and this is pretty much going down that path of, okay, well, if I can do things and get things for free and get things easy, that's probably the path I'm going to take, other than spinning it up on my own, unless there's a really good reason to do it. And giving people, a lot of times across large organizations, people just don't know these things exist. Oh, you have a starter kit that I can use for a new microservice that comes with all the tools that I need? Great. I didn't know that existed. Love it. I'll take it. And, leveraging your developer portal as that kind of single pane of glass to be, even if it's the traffic cop like I was talking about before, but it's trying to reduce chaos inside of your organization and give people insights into what those things are. And that goes back to what's the problem you're trying to solve? And if it's that, then absolutely you should be trying to leverage those kinds of things. But, trying to say that we have to standardize before we get to a dev portal, I wouldn't do that. Even if you have two models inside of there and say, like, this is the one we're moving towards, here's ADRs, here's all the things that the reasoning why we want to do this. And then here's an exception path as well. All of that can be leveraged inside of your dev portal to give people the path towards doing the right thing in the easiest way possible.
We keep coming back to know what problem you're solving. And there's another question in the chat about, the question is, what do you think is the bare minimum feature set that a portal needs to provide impact? And I think that's such an interesting question, because again, I would argue that is an impossible question to answer, because it's really, what is the problem you're trying to solve for in your organization? Great example of this. I can think of two organizations I've talked to recently that told me that in one case, they built a service catalog and then realized that the service catalog was not valuable to developers. Then they brought in some bespoke developer tooling into their portal and realized that was the thing. That was a thing that was really valuable to developers. And so service catalog being one of the most sort of common cross-cutting feature sets in portals, some organizations are finding that that's not even valuable, at least from the standpoint of the developer. Another organization I talked to, a large organization, they were building their own developer portal, and they didn't even build a service catalog. That was not in scope of their sort of V1. And they did that very intentionally because they had done the research to really understand what is it that developers were really struggling with. And it wasn't service discovery. It was other things. So Chris, I don't know what you would add there, but how would you answer the question? What's the bare minimum capability that a portal needs?
I think you gave two really great examples of, it's basically impossible to be able to tell. The people like to start with what's easy, and that's very rarely the problem. And a service catalog feels easy, but it generally doesn't give you as much information as you might hope. Where, okay, do I have a good taxonomy of, do I understand what my domains look like, what my systems might look like, how people actually operate across the organization? Well, if you don't understand any of that, then you're going to build a really bad service catalog. If you don't understand the problems that people What is the information they actually need that they can't get easily now? If you don't understand that, you're going to build a really bad service catalog. Like, are you trying to break down a monolith into microservices? Then yes, you should probably build your catalog as you're building new services. But if you're a gigantic, mature company that just has things all over the place, there's a whole bunch of different answers and there's not the right one. But how do you build feedback loops and how do you start to gather information from your community is absolutely where you have to start. And layering in good product thinking and really truly understanding your user and the things that they're willing to change their process to do. This has created enough value that they're essentially paying money for it with their time to adopt your thing. And if they're not willing to do that, then you've absolutely solved the wrong problem.
Yeah, great advice there. And you started touching on adoption, and I want to talk about adoption and implementation because that's one of the biggest challenges. We talked about this in our last session. I want to talk about it again now. One of the things I want to bring up is the sort of implementation model of the federated implementation model versus the centralized implementation model. And I think we can talk specifically about service catalogs in this regard. We see organizations where they try to, for example, have every team in the organization create config as code YAML files, keep those up to date in order to have a service catalog. And in some cases, I think that works. In other cases, that never works. And there's never a service catalog that's actually accurate and up to date. Another approach is the centralized model where there's a single team that's basically creating the catalog, going across the organization, maybe doing config as code on their own and creating that source of truth and keeping it up to date. What have you seen in terms of both of these approaches as far as how organizations actually implement and keep up to date their IDPs?
This to me has way less to do with the IDP and more to do with how the organization actually operates. If no one feels any pain from that service catalog being completely out of date, then you're never going to keep it up to date. So how do you start to think about your processes and the way that you're trying to do things in general that use your dev portal as an enabler to that? So if you're using ServiceNow for incident management, then how do you build a process that incentivizes development teams to keep this up to date and not get a phone call at 2:00 in the morning if something goes down and you're the wrong person they called? And so again, a developer portal can be that enabler, but you have to think about things in a broader process perspective to really drive that, or you're never going to have, whether it's federated or central, you're never going to have it up to date unless there's pain that people will feel.
Pain people will feel, or you somehow gamify it or create a process, a gating process. I've seen organizations try to do that where, the only way you can deploy is through Backstage, right? That's a forcing function for keeping up to date. Of course, we're only talking about service catalog, but there's a lot of other parts of the taxonomy in a lot of these IDPs that matter. For example, the team data, that is a big pain point, friction point for a lot of organizations as well. So I think, no matter which of these paths you're thinking about, the build, the hybrid, the buy, thinking about how you're actually going to implement and keep it up to date should be an important consideration in the path you choose. Chris, I want to shift into the last topic, which is our predictions and pontifications about where this market is going and what's coming. One of the things you brought up with me is a prediction around the merging of the ID platform and the ID portal. This is a topic we touched on in our last conversation. Make sure you share with listeners what we mean with that distinction and what your prediction is for the market.
Yeah, so developer platforms are more coming from the platform engineering space, and how do I provide development teams with the right infrastructure and everything else to manage their application one way or another? And then the developer portal is more around service catalogs and documentation and plugins and all of those other things. So very different angles, and they're unfortunately we're both trying to use the same kind of words to describe them. But I think these are going to have to merge together. Having a platform engineering team that is providing layers of kind of infrastructure as code and all the things that come along with it, DevSecOps, everything else, you really can't kind of decouple that from your developer portal in one way or another. And, I look at the developer portal being the window into your platform. And, a lot of different companies, the only way that you can really interact with the platform is through a CLI or maybe some kind of custom homegrown just little UI. And your developer portal is a perfect way of being able to build plugins or being able to build connections to that to give people insights into what's going on. So I don't think we're very far away from this. And there's already some kind of players in the game that are working on kind of major integrations between those kinds of platforms and portals to be able to enable this kind of thing.
I think that's so interesting because one of my thoughts around the market is this obsession with the DAUs, daily active users, as the success measure for developer portals. And I talked to so many organizations that went into the process thinking of it that way, but have since sort of pivoted and shifted to thinking of developer portals more from a governance standpoint. But I do think that the consolidation of the ID platform, the orchestration and operational pain over our services, combining that with the information that's currently in these portals, kind of changes the game as far as maybe does make the ID portal more of a DAU sort of thing where developers really are in there to do their daily work. I think that's the biggest thing that's my hot take on the market right now is, the developer portal is very much marketed as like the daily hub for developers. I think the reality is in most cases, organizations aren't there yet. Like that vision has not been realized. I think there are organizations that have done it, like Spotify, but only through a lot of investment and and continued investment over time.
It's truly understanding how your organization actually works and then being able to use a dev portal as an enabler to make that happen. If it's honestly a little scary how many people don't really understand how their code gets moved into production, or the fact that it's done 12 different ways across their engineering organization and there's no standardization to that. There's no anything. And so, how can you track value and how can you track how well things are going? If you think about incident management, if every team is doing their kind of, CD differently, how do you know if something's going wrong and what that might be? And if you're a team, you're an app team, you should want some level of standardization, but that takes, to your point, it takes the investment, it takes the thought, and it takes really collaborating around how can we design this in a way that provides high levels of quality and gives the application owners levels of autonomy to be able to do the things that they need to do without kind of handcuffing them.
I'll conclude with sharing, today, at least based on my sampling of talking to different organizations, the build path is still by far the dominant, the majority path. Every organization, larger organization I talk to is either building their own or building on Backstage. I am bullish about what Spotify is doing to reduce the pain and the friction in that journey. To me, it seems like that's going to be critical for all these organizations that are still early in that Backstage journey, for them to realize the goals that they've set out to. So you have a lot of insight into the work Spotify is doing as well, but curious for your take on that.
I think you're right. Where with people are right now is they see an open source product and they think that it's easy, and because it's cheap because they can go grab it and they can implement it in a couple of days. I do see a lot of people struggling with it as well. And I think there's going to be a happy medium or kind of middle ground. That hybrid space is where a lot of people are going to move towards, of being able to give people the flexibility that they need in a quick, you have the quicker setup time, you have the customization in kind of the biggest box possible. And even Spotify's moving towards that model in some ways, of giving people a faster, quicker onboarding experience and building out their marketplace and those kinds of things to help pull those things together. But it's, between those two areas, and again, I don't want to completely discount, or I don't even want to discount at all, the kind of opinionated SaaS products out there. There's a lot of them that are fantastic. Yep. And if you don't need the crazy levels of customization, if you're in a smaller startup or even in a mid-sized company where you don't have a lot of legacy stuff, organizational silos, there's a lot of those tools that are going to be absolutely fantastic, that are just not, you just don't need the, Swiss Army knife of developer portals. So there's going to be space for all of them. But again, where do you sit inside of that spectrum, and what problem are you trying to solve is the biggest question that you have to ask.
Chris, thanks so much for your time today, and thanks to everyone who's joined. We'll be sharing the recording of this shortly after we end the call. And Chris and I both love talking about developer portals and everything developer experience, so don't hesitate to reach out to us individually. Chris, thank you for your time again.
Thanks, Abi, and thanks everybody. Appreciate it.